The pristine 2020 Shelby GT 500 Mustang and grabber line gleamed in the late afternoon sun as Marcus Delaney pulled into his driveway. He'd sacrificed and saved for 3 years to afford this masterpiece of American muscle, $65,000 worth of engineering perfection that had been his dream since childhood. The car wasn't just transportation, it was a culmination of decades of aspiration, the reward for countless overtime hours and careful financial planning. Marcus had moved into the Oak Ridge Estates subdivision just 6 months ago, attracted by the well-maintained properties and proximity to his new job at the aerospace engineering firm. The Homeowners Association fees had seemed steep, but the neighborhood's pristine appearance and quiet atmosphere had convinced him it was worth the investment. Now, as he caressed the Mustang's sleek hood one last time before heading inside, he had no idea that his prized possession was about to become the center of a neighborhood war. Beautiful car called Mrs. Harrington, his 70-year-old neighbor, who spent most afternoons tending to her immaculate garden. Though I'm not sure everyone appreciates that particular shade of green. Marcus smiled politely, already accustomed to the thinly veiled comments about his car's vibrant color. Thank you. Grabber lime is actually a historic Mustang color from the 70s they brought back for this model. Mrs. Harrington nodded without enthusiasm, her pruning shears snipping methodically at her rose bushes. Well, Gerald Patterson was asking about it at the HOA meeting last night. You know Gerald, head of the Architectural Control Committee. He mentioned something about the HOA bylaws and approved vehicle colors. Vehicle colors. Marcus paused, key in hand. The HOA regulates what color car I can own. Oh, I wouldn't know the specifics, dear. Mrs. Harrington's tone suggested otherwise. I just thought you should know it came up. Gerald seemed quite concerned. That night, Marcus skimmed through the inch-thick HOA covenant he'd signed months ago without reading thoroughly. Buried on page 42, section 16.3, was a clause about exterior visible property that vaguely mentioned vehicles visible from the street must maintain neighborhood aesthetic standards as determined by the Architectural Control Committee. The language was ambiguous enough that Marcus dismissed it with a laugh. Surely a factory paint job on a limited production vehicle couldn't violate any reasonable standard. Besides, he'd seen a bright yellow Corvette 3 streets over and a metallic purple Tesla down the block. What Marcus didn't know was that Gerald Patterson, a retired corporate lawyer with too much time and too little purpose, had been documenting his Mustang since the day Marcus moved in. Patterson had already compiled a dossier of photos, printed out the relevant HOA bylaws, and was crafting a strongly worded letter requesting the immediate remediation of the non-conforming vehicle color. Patterson also didn't realize who he was dealing with. Marcus Delaney wasn't just an aerospace engineer. He was a former military officer with an unyielding sense of principle and the stubbornness to match. The collision course was set, and neither man had any intention of yielding. 3 days later, Marcus found an official notice taped to his front door. RE, vehicle color violation. The battle lines had been drawn. Marcus crumpled the violation notice in his fist, his jaw clenched as he read the ultimatum. Repaint the Mustang within 14 days or face an initial fine of $100, followed by $50 daily penalties. The letter, signed by Gerald Patterson, cited bylaw violations regarding garish and non-conforming vehicle aesthetics detrimental to neighborhood property values. This is absurd, Marcus muttered, walking to his garage where the grabber lying Shelby sat like a defiant jewel. He ran his hand along the contoured hood, feeling a protective instinct rise within him. This wasn't just about a car. It was about principle, about the slow erosion of individual rights in favor of enforced conformity. The next morning, Marcus composed a measured response attaching Ford's official marketing materials showing that the grabber line was a factory color option on a limited production vehicle. He also included links to 3 automotive publications praising the bold color choice in their reviews. His letter concluded with a polite but firm refusal to comply with the repaint demand, citing the ambiguous language in the HOA covenant and the presence of other brightly colored vehicles in the neighborhood. 3 days later, Marcus returned from work to find a certified letter in his mailbox. The HOA board had called an emergency meeting and doubled down on their position. The other colorful vehicles, they explained, had been granted variances based on historical precedent and grandfathered exceptions. His request for a similar variance was denied. The deadline remained firm. That evening, as Marcus grilled steaks on his back patio, his neighbor Ryan from 2 doors down hopped the fence with 2 beers in hand. Heard about your run-in with the Patterson regime, Ryan said, handing Marcus a bottle. Thought you could use this. Marcus accepted the beer with a nod. You've had issues with them too. Everyone has, Ryan laughed, though there was no humor in it. Gerald's been ruling this neighborhood with an iron fist for 8 years. Last summer, he fined the Gonzalez family for having their garage door open for more than 30 minutes. Mrs. Chen had to replace her entire front garden because the roses she planted weren't on the approved plant list. The stories go on. And nobody fights back? Marcus asked, flipping the stakes. Ryan took a long swig of his beer. People try, but Gerald's got the board in his pocket. 3 of the 5 members are his golf buddies. Plus, he's a retired corporate attorney who treats HOA enforcement like it's his new career. Most folks eventually give in. It's cheaper than fighting. Well, I'm not most folks, Marcus said, his resolve hardening. And I'm not painting my car. What Marcus didn't share with Ryan was his plan to attend the next HOA meeting scheduled for the following week. He spent the weekend researching HOA law, finding precedents where overzealous boards had been successfully challenged. Marcus discovered that in their state, vehicle color restrictions pushed the legal boundaries of what HOAs could reasonably regulate. The day before the meeting, Marcus was working late at the aerospace firm when his phone buzzed with texts from multiple neighbors. The messages all contained variations of the same alarming news. They're doing something to your car. Marcus broke every speed limit racing home, his heart pounding with growing dread. As he turned onto his street, a setting sun illuminated a nightmare scene in his driveway. 3 men in paint coveralls stood around his beloved Mustang, which was now partially covered in a dull battleship gray primer. Gerald Patterson stood supervising, clipboard in hand, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When he saw Marcus screeching to a halt and leaping from his company car, the smile only widened. "Ah, Mr. Delaney, we tried to reach you. According to Section 16.7 of the Covenant, after the remedy period has elapsed, the HOA reserves the right to address violations directly and bill the homeowner for reasonable costs incurred." Marcus stared in horror at his partially painted car, the magnificent grabber line now defaced with uneven patches of primer. The custom paint job that had added $5,000 to the vehicle's value was being systematically destroyed before his eyes. "Get away from my car," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. The painters, sensing the tension, stepped back, paint guns lowered. "I'm afraid the work order has been approved by the board," Gerald replied, tapping his clipboard. "The painting will be completed tomorrow and you'll be billed $3,200 for the professional respray. Of course, this is in addition to the accumulated fines, which now total $450. Marcus pulled out his phone and began documenting everything. "This is criminal vandalism. You had no right to touch my property without my consent." "Actually," Gerald smirked, "you gave consent when you signed the covenant. Page 67, paragraph 4. Perhaps you should have read the fine print." As a small crowd of neighbors gathered at a safe distance, Marcus made 2 calls, first to the police, then to a lawyer. The battle that Gerald Patterson had so casually initiated was about to escalate beyond anything the Oak Ridge Estate's HOA had ever experienced. 2 police officers arrived within 20 minutes, their presence drawing even more curious neighbors from their homes. Officer Ramirez, a veteran cop with salt and pepper hair, surveyed the scene with practiced neutrality while his younger partner took statements. Marcus stood protectively next to his half-gray, half-line Mustang, still seething but maintaining composure as he explained the situation. Gerald Patterson, for his part, appeared utterly unruffled. He presented the officers the leather portfolio containing highlighted HOA bylaws, signed work orders, and a timeline of violation notifications, with Marcus's signature on the certified mail receipts. "As you can see, officers, this is a civil matter between a homeowners association and a non-compliant member," Gerald explained smoothly. "Mr. Delaney agreed to these terms when he purchased his property." Officer Ramirez frowned slightly. "Sir, did you authorize anyone to paint your vehicle?" "Absolutely not," Marcus replied firmly. "This is vandalism, plain and simple." The officers exchanged glances. "Unfortunately," Ramirez said, "this does appear to fall into a gray area legally. The HOA documentation shows they follow their internal procedures. However," he turned to Gerald, "altering someone's personal property without explicit consent is problematic regardless of what's in your covenant." After nearly an hour of discussion, the officers departed without making any arrests, instead filing an incident report and advising both parties to seek legal counsel. The painters had packed up their equipment, leaving Marcus's Mustang in a grotesque, half-finished state. "This isn't over," Marcus told Gerald as the crowd began to disperse. "No," Gerald agreed with cold satisfaction. "It certainly isn't." The following morning, Marcus contacted Jeremy Zhang, an attorney specializing in property disputes who had successfully challenged several HOAs in the past. After reviewing the covenant and the photos of Marcus's defaced Mustang, Zhang didn't mince words. "They overstepped," he said, leaning back in his office chair. "HOAs have broad authority, but there are limits. The covenant language about vehicles is vague at best, and their actions are disproportionate to any alleged violation. That said, these cases can be expensive and drawn out." "I don't care," Marcus replied, his determination unwavering. This isn't just about my car anymore. Good, Zhang nodded, because your neighbors clearly feel the same way. As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Emergency meeting at my place tonight. 15 neighbors confirmed. Patterson needs to be stopped. That evening, Marcus was stunned to find Ryan's living room packed with homeowners, many of whom he'd never met. There was Maria Gonzalez, who'd been fined for her open garage door. Henry and Sue Chen, whose roses had been deemed non-compliant. The Parkers, whose request to install solar panels had been repeatedly denied. And nearly a dozen others, all with their own stories of Gerald Patterson's tyranny. We've been silent too long, said Henry Chen, a soft-spoken man in his 60s. What they did to your car crossed a line. Maria Gonzalez, a fiery elementary school principal, nodded in agreement. We've compiled documentation of every questionable HOA decision from the past 3 years. The patterns are clear: selective enforcement, procedural violations, conflicts of interest. Marcus was moved by the solidarity but also concerned. I'd already engaged an attorney, but this could get expensive. We're prepared for that, Sue Chen replied, producing a document. We've drafted a legal defense fund agreement. 15 households have already pledged $500 each to start. This isn't just your fight anymore. As the impromptu rebellion took shape across the neighborhood, Gerald Patterson was holding court at his own dining room table with the HOA board members. The atmosphere was tense as he updated them on the situation. Delaney called the police. He informed them, his tone dismissive. As expected, they recognize our authority. The painters will complete the job tomorrow. Elaine Woodward, the board treasurer, and typically Gerald's most reliable ally, shifted uncomfortably. Gerald, I'm not sure we should proceed. Painting someone's car without explicit consent seems extreme. We're opening ourselves to liability. Gerald's eyes narrowed. We followed the covenant to the letter. Backing down now would undermine everything we've built. This neighborhood maintains its value because we enforce standards. Make no mistake, this is a test case. If Delaney wins, the floodgates will open. What Gerald didn't share with the board was the certified letter he received that morning from the State Attorney General's office responding to complaints about the HOA's practices that predated the Mustang incident. The letter requested documentation of all HOA actions over the past 2 years for review, a development that had privately unnerved him. The next morning, Marcus awoke to the sound of engines outside his house. To his astonishment, a row of cars lined his street, all in vibrant, non-standard colors. A bright purple Tesla, a yellow Corvette, a neon orange Jeep, and several others created a rainbow of automotive defiance. Ryan stood in Marcus's driveway, grinning widely. Color protest, he explained. Organized it last night after you left. Everyone's parking here for the day. Marcus laughed for the first time in days, but his amusement was short-lived. Turning the corner at the end of the street was Gerald Patterson, accompanied by 2 men in paint coveralls heading directly toward Marcus's house and the half-painted Mustang sitting in. The colorful parade of vehicles lining Marcus's street stopped Gerald Patterson in his tracks. His thin lips pressed into an even thinner line as he surveyed the automotive rainbow, clipboard clutched tightly in his manicured hand. The painters behind him exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the tension in the air. Gerald marched forward, undeterred. This childish display changes nothing, he announced loudly as he approached Marcus's driveway where a small crowd had gathered. The work order stands. The vehicle will be painted to comply with neighborhood standards. Marcus stepped forward, phone in hand, already recording. My attorney has advised me that any further alteration of my vehicle without consent constitutes criminal damage to property, regardless of what your covenant says. Your attorney is mistaken, Gerald replied coldly. Now please remove yourself so these gentlemen can complete their work. What happened next would later become neighborhood legend. Maria Gonzalez, still in her professional attire from her principal's office, stepped directly between Gerald and the Mustang. They'll have to paint around me, she announced, arms folded. Henry Chen joined her silently, followed by the Parkers, then Ryan, and one by one, nearly 20 neighbors formed a human barrier around Marcus's car. Someone had brought lawn chairs. Another had a cooler of drinks. It had the sudden atmosphere of a block party, one centered around a half-green, half-gray Shelby GT 500. Gerald's face flushed crimson. This is trespassing. I'll call the police. Actually, Marcus said calmly, these people are my invited guests on my property. You, however, are not. Officer Ramirez arrived 15 minutes later, looking decidedly uncomfortable as he took in the scene. Gerald immediately approached him, waving his clipboard. These people are obstructing official HOA business, he insisted. I demand they be removed. Ramirez sighed heavily. Mr. Patterson, as I explained yesterday, this is a civil dispute. These individuals are on private property with the owner's permission. There's no criminal trespass occurring. Then what about this? Gerald gestured wildly at the rainbow of cars lining the street. These vehicles are in violation of parking ordinances. Ramirez checked each vehicle methodically. They're all legally parked, sir. No fire hydrants blocked, no driveways obstructed. As Gerald sputtered in protest, a black Mercedes pulled up. A woman in her 50s emerged, her tailored suit and confident stride marking her as someone accustomed to command. She scanned the scene, then walked directly toward Gerald. Mr. Patterson, Diane Montgomery, representing the Oak Ridge Estates HOA board. Gerald's expression shifted from anger to confusion. You don't represent the board. I've never seen you before. I was retained this morning, she replied, handing him a document. After an emergency board meeting called by 3 members. I believe you know Elaine Woodward, James Holston, and Michael Rivera. The blood drained from Gerald's face as he scanned the document. This is preposterous. They can't. They can, and they have. Montgomery cut him off. The board has voted to rescind the painting order for Mr. Delaney's vehicle and to suspend all non-essential HOA enforcement actions pending a complete review of procedures. She turned to the painters. Gentlemen, your services will not be needed today. The HOA will honor your cancellation fee. As the painters packed up their equipment, a stunned silence fell over the gathered neighbors. Gerald stood frozen, the paper trembling in his hand. Montgomery addressed the crowd. The board extends its apologies for this situation. They've scheduled an open forum next Tuesday evening to discuss HOA policies and to establish a more collaborative approach moving forward. A cheer erupted from the neighbors, followed by spontaneous applause. Someone popped open a bottle of champagne that had mysteriously appeared in the cooler. Gerald finally found his voice. This isn't over. You can't just. Actually, it is over, Gerald, Montgomery said firmly. At least your unilateral approach to HOA management is over. The board has also voted to create an ethics committee to review past enforcement actions, including several questionable financial transactions related to contractor selection. As if on cue, Elaine Woodward's said and pulled up. The treasurer stepped out, avoiding Gerald's gaze as she approached the gathering. I brought the HOA financial records, she announced, lifting a large accordion file from her trunk. And I believe the board owes Mr. Delaney compensation for the damage to his vehicle. Gerald's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this. All of you. He spun on his heel, storming toward his house, nearly colliding with a delivery person approaching Marcus with a large envelope. Marcus Delaney, certified letter, sir. Marcus signed for the package and tore it open. His eyebrows shot up as he scanned the document inside. Well, he said, looking up at his gathered neighbors with a mixture of disbelief and amusement, it seems Mr. Patterson has decided to sue me for malicious non-compliance and incitement of community disorder. He's seeking $75,000 in damages to his reputation and mental distress. The absurdity of the situation hung in the air for a moment before Ryan broke the silence. Well, at least he didn't ask for your car. Laughter rippled through the crowd as Marcus passed the lawsuit to his neighbor. In that moment, standing beside his beloved but defaced Mustang and surrounded by people who had been strangers just days ago, Marcus felt something unexpected: gratitude. This battle over a car color had revealed the true character of his community, both its worst tendencies and its best qualities. As the impromptu block party continued into the afternoon, Marcus found himself in conversation with Diane Montgomery and Elaine Woodward. 3 weeks after the driveway standoff, Marcus sat in a conference room at Zhang and Associates, surrounded by legal documents, witness statements, and a surprising amount of media coverage. His Mustang, now fully restored to its original grabber line glory, had become something of a local celebrity, with several news outlets picking up what they dubbed the HOA color wars. Jeremy Zhang spread several newspaper clippings across the polished table. You've struck a nerve, he said, gesturing to the headlines. We've received calls from homeowners in 12 different states dealing with similar HOA overreach. Your case is becoming a rallying point. Marcus scanned an article from the local paper. The photo showed his Mustang parked in front of his house, surrounded by neighbors holding colorful signs reading HOAs, Serve, Don't Suppress, and My House, My Choice. What about Patterson's lawsuit? Marcus asked. Frivolous, Zhang replied confidently. Judge Watkins has scheduled a hearing next week on our motion to dismiss, but that's not why I called you in today. He slid a thick document across the table. This just came from the state attorney general's office. Marcus flipped through the pages, his eyes widening. They're launching an investigation into Oak Ridge Estates HOA. Not just Oak Ridge, John corrected. They're using your case as a springboard for a statewide investigation into HOA governance practices, financial transparency, and enforcement actions. Patterson inadvertently opened Pandora's box. Marcus shook his head in disbelief, all because of a green car. It was never really about the car, John observed. It was about unchecked power. Speaking of which, he pulled out another document. Elaine Woodward has been extremely helpful. These are bank records showing that the painting company hired to respray your car is owned by Gerald's brother-in-law. Every contractor hired by the HOA in the past 5 years has some connection to Gerald or his allies on the board. Stealth dealing, Marcus muttered. No wonder he was so aggressive about enforcement. Precisely. The more violations, the more remediation work, the more money funneled to friendly businesses. John gathered the papers into a neat stack. Now about our countersuit. Meanwhile, across town, Gerald Patterson paced the floor of his attorney's office, his normally impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. His suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened, and the dark circles under his eyes testified to sleepless nights. This is absurd, he fumed. I give it 8 years to maintain the standards of Oak Ridge Estates. Property values have increased 32% under my leadership. And this is how they thank me? His attorney, Martin Graves, a college friend who had reluctantly taken on the case, looked uncomfortable. Gerald, I've reviewed everything. The judge is likely to dismiss your lawsuit against Delaney. More concerning are these allegations of financial impropriety. The board has extensive documentation. The board has been compromised, Gerald interrupted. They've fallen for this neighborly come-by nonsense. Standards require enforcement. Rules exist for a reason. Nevertheless, Graves continued carefully, I recommend withdrawing your suit against Delaney and cooperating fully with the board's financial review. Fighting this will only invite more scrutiny, particularly now that the Attorney General's office is involved. Gerald stopped pacing. The AG is involved. Graves nodded grimly. They've launched a broader investigation using Oak Ridge as a starting point. Your emails discussing enforcement strategies are problematic when taken out of context. They weren't out of context, Gerald snapped. I was doing my job. As Gerald continued his tirade across the city in the offices of the Regional Housing Authority, Director Carmen Vasquez was meeting with her team and representatives from the Attorney General's office. The Oak Ridge situation has uncovered a systemic issue, she explained, gesturing to data projected on the wall. We've identified over 70 HOAs in our jurisdiction with similar patterns of selective enforcement, financial irregularities, and excessive fines. A young analyst raised her hand. The most concerning trend is what we're calling violation farming, HOAs actively seeking or even creating violations to generate revenue through fines or to direct remediation contracts to preferred vendors. Agent Thomas from the AG's office nodded. This goes beyond civil matters. In some cases, we're seeing potential fraud, coercion, and misappropriation of funds. Director Vasquez leaned forward. We need legislative action. HOAs operate with minimal oversight despite wielding significant power over homeowners. The Delaney case gives us a perfect opportunity to advocate for reform. The following Tuesday evening, Marcus found himself in Oak Ridge Estates Community Center, which was packed beyond capacity for the special HOA meeting. Chairs had been arranged in a large circle, rather than the usual rows facing a head table, a symbolic gesture of the new board's commitment to collaboration. Diane Montgomery opened the proceedings. Thank you all for coming. Tonight is about rebuilding trust and establishing a new approach to community governance. First, I'd like to announce that Gerald Patterson has resigned from the board, effective immediately. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Montgomery continued, additionally, the board has unanimously voted to settle Mr. Delaney's claims, including full restoration of his vehicle and compensation for related damages. Most importantly, we're proposing a complete revision of the HOA covenant, with community input at every stage. As Montgomery outlined the proposed changes, more transparent decision-making, reasonable restrictions, appeals processes, and financial oversight. Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Maria Gonzalez. Congratulations, she whispered. You've changed everything. We all did, he corrected her. Maria smiled. They're forming a new governance committee tonight. We need people who'll stand up for what's right but also know how to build consensus. You should volunteer. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Me? On the HOA board.